Hello, I'm Mary Ito, and welcome to the CRAM podcast. CRAM is an acronym for Communicating Research and More, which is what we try to do on this podcast. A lot of exciting research and groundbreaking ideas never reach the public, but they have the potential to change the way we think and act. And here we are, we're at the beginning of a new year, the start of a year filled with decisions that you will make every day. Think about it. You'll make decisions about what you'll eat, what you'll wear, how much sleep you should get, whether you should see a doctor. Small decisions, big decisions, they amount to hundreds of thousands of decisions a year. But that process can be messy and anxiety-inducing for many of us. We worry about the choices we make, especially when it comes to our health. But it doesn't have to be that way, according to Tim Caulfield. He's the author of the book, Relax, a guide to everyday health decisions with more facts and less worry. Hooray! He's also the Canada Research Chair in Health Law and Policy, a professor in the Faculty of Law and the School of Public Health at the University of Alberta, and he joins us. Hi, Tim.
Hi, thanks for having me on, Mary.
Oh, it's great to have you. So, my first question is, I am curious to know what you worry about.
Oh my gosh. Okay, buckle up. Where to start? And it's funny you should start with that. No one's ever started with that. That's one of the reasons I wanted to write the book. I'm not going to say I'm really an anxious person. I'm not going to say that, but I do like overthink things. You know what I mean?
Do you really?
I do.
I'm shocked. I'm shocked to hear that, right? Because you have all the evidence. So you would think that you are so calm and laid back about everything.
Not at all. And, at the beginning of the book, as you know, I say, look, I totally recognize that human beings do not, we're not robots, right? We don't live our life in this hyper rational manner where we're trying to weigh the evidence for every decision, toilet paper over or under. We don't do that. But we do think sometimes that we're making a decision based on the evidence, and in fact, the evidence doesn't support that decision. And there's a whole bunch of cultural forces that shape that. And I'm one of those people. So a lot of the topics I picked for the book were topics I was interested in, but also topics I heard all the time in my work.
Yeah, no, totally. They spoke to me as well, and we're going to get to them. But I wonder about that too, because you're right. I think a lot of us, and me as well, we worry needlessly. Like I think about the amount of worrying I do about stuff that, I maybe have no control over, or maybe I'm guessing and I don't really know what the evidence is. I mean, what do you think is at the core of many of the, and I mean bad decisions, many of the bad decisions we can make through worry?
Well, first of all, I'm going to take a step back because, one of the big themes in the book is, spoiler alert, this is kind of one of my my conclusions at the end, is always think big picture, right, Mary? Like, we worry about our diet and how much water we're supposed to drink and all these sort of details in our life. And really, you're nibbling at the margins. You should really, especially in the context of health, always land on those big picture conclusions, right? And that's a theme I come back to. I've come back as a theme in some of my past books too.
Mm-hmm.
Always think of the body of evidence and those big picture conclusions. But the economy of our current information environment, right? They don't want you to, they sound like a conspiracy theorist. It's not designed to encourage that, right? The economy is designed to make us worry about things, to fearmonger, to sell us products, to sell us ideology, to create what I call doubt mongering, in order to even if you don't believe necessarily in a particular conclusion, they want to encourage sort of doubt in that conclusion. So they can sell products, they can sell ideology, they can sell perhaps even their practice. So there's a lot of things going on in society that sort of encourage us and invite us to either doubt the science or to question our own decisions.
And isn't that really they're preying on our emotions?
So often,
right?
Mary, you're right about that, and they play to our cognitive biases, right? So they play to something called for example, we could go on, we could list a lot of them, but for example, the negativity bias, right? We humans are hardwired to worry,
Mhm.
and it makes evolutionary sense, right?
Yeah,
There's tigers hang out over there. Don't go over there. I remember
right,
that, and
right.
this is a bad plant. Don't eat that. I got sick last time. So we are evolutionarily wired to worry. And there's been a lot of interesting research that shows that, yes, that is the case. They've even done this kind of research on an international level, right? So it cuts across borders. It's cross-cultural. And there have also been studies that have shown, no surprise here, that scary news outperforms positive
Yeah.
news. Scary tweets outperform positive tweets. So yeah, they play on our cognitive bias, the negativity bias. They also play on what's called the availability bias, that you're more likely to remember something that's dramatic, right?
Mm.
And if you can remember it, you're more likely to believe it and act on it. So for sure, Mary, they play on our cognitive biases that we all have. You have, I
Yeah.
have, to make our decision making more difficult, but also more anxiety provoking.
Well, what I liked about your book is the way you had set it up, and you go through, a typical day from morning until night, and you look at some of the decisions that we make. So, for example, guilty. You talk about cell phones and the fact that so many of us, that's the first thing we reach for, right? It's not like we reach for our partner and give them a hug and say good morning. No, we reach for our cell phone.
It's so true. And the data I have in the book is, I think it's 75% of people's first thing they do is they look at their phone when they wake up. You're right. They don't kiss their loved one or pet their
The
dog.
cat, yeah.
They look at and I think the numbers have gotten worse since then. Like, this book's it's a fairly new book, and it's gotten worse since then. And if you're a millennial or younger, it's even more dramatic. And you look at the number of people that, take their phone to the bathroom with them immediately. And that's when they do their email and all that. So I raise that for a number of reasons. First of all, it just highlights how chaotic our information environment is. We're constantly bombarded, right? Constantly bombarded. And the other point I make in the book is maybe that's not a great way to start your day, especially we're just talking about the negativity bias. So you're probably going to see something negative right off, right? As soon as you wake up. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of reasons why that's probably a bad idea. And the last one I'll say is, you shouldn't have the phone in your bedroom with you. You shouldn't be able to even do that. And by the way, that is one of the things I do walk the walk. I don't do everything I recommend in the book, by the way, but I do walk that walk. I recommend that you put your bed your phone to bed at night. One of the people I interview in
Oh,
the book, she actually has a bed. She researches this stuff. She has a bed and she tucks her phone in. She has a little blanket she puts on it, which is a great idea. It's this little ritual, right? To remind, okay, my phone's gone to bed. I can't
can't
bother
touch
it
it. Yeah.
anymore. Yeah. So anyway, there
Well,
you go.
you know what? Wait, because it did make me think about it. Because again, it's another one of those mindless things that I do. But you're right. When I reach for my phone in the morning, it's usually headlines I'm getting, and they're usually negative. So now I'm starting my day off with some like terrible world disaster or who knows what's happening to the economy, or on a negative note.
It's true. And, here's one of the things that, I always try to start my day, and I recommend this in the book, right? And you're a creative person. So I bet you try to do this too. You start your day with the creative projects, right? Where you're fresh and I'm going to write, I'm going to wake up in the morning with my coffee and I'm going to start writing. And I love it too. So it's not like it's something I don't want to do, but you get drawn into the chaotic information environment through those headlines. And that happens to
Mm.
me 60% of the time in the morning, and all of a sudden an hour has passed, right? And sometimes it's very related to your work, so you feel like you have to do it. But yeah, it can really be consuming, both emotionally and from a time perspective.
Okay, so some of the facts as well, like regarding sort of the morning ritual type thing, it really did surprise me. For example, I assumed that brushing and flossing our teeth, which I guess a lot of us don't do, the flossing part of it, but certainly brushing, we just assume that that is good and essential for dental health. And you said some surprising things about that.
I did, and I really want to emphasize off the top, and I'm going to come back to it at the end. The important thing in those sections of the book is I want to highlight how the research is not definitive, right? I'm not saying there's no, not necessarily no benefit, but it's kind of, as you just said, right? It's presented to us as a truism,
Yes.
as if slam dunk obvious, right?
Right.
And that isn't the case, especially with flossing. The data around flossing is incredibly messy. And for another reason, I've looked at the data very recently on this, and it hasn't really improved at all over the last couple of years. And you have to floss, for example, extreme perfectly. No one does that. I know you don't, Mary.
No, I don't. So you're saying you have to floss perfectly in order to achieve any kind of significant result. That's what you're saying.
That's right. And there have been studies that have suggested there's no correlation between flossing and preventing cavities, which is often presented as the main reason to do it. There's some evidence about gum disease that might be beneficial. But again, it's not like it's a slam dunk. No, I do floss, remove your food from your teeth and stuff. The brushing is also fascinating, right? Because everyone goes to the dentist and they talk about how perfectly you're supposed to floss.
Yes.
Not a lot of evidence to support that, but brushing is so important because it's a fluoride delivery mechanism, right? And that's the biggest benefit you get from brushing is
fluoride.
You get fluoride on your teeth, right?
Wow. Okay. So that's kind of this side benefit.
But I want to be really careful. I don't want to get hate mail from the dentist.
No, because I was just going to say, have you been getting hate mail from dentists?
I'm going to say, maybe light hate mail, but I interviewed a lot of fantastic academics, dental academics, and as you know in the book, and talked about this, and the point there really is about this idea of it being definitive, and to be fair, it can be hard to study well, right? And I think that's another point I make in the book. But you certainly have seen as a result of this equivocal evidence, the messaging coming from some of the dental associations around things like flossing and brushing changing a little bit, being a little bit less definitive. So I think that's reflecting what the evidence base actually says.
Well, we've been people who don't floss regularly have had this huge guilt trip about it, right? Because we're made to feel bad every time we go to the office. Like, have you been flossing? No, not really. So this might be comforting to those people, but the fluoride aspect is very interesting because you also talk about fluoridation of water. And I know that's been a big thing among some communities who got rid of fluoride because they didn't think it was healthy for people.
You're right, and this is definitely an area where I get hate mail.
Oh,
no, I don't have to. Yeah, I don't have to pull punches there. But look, the evidence about fluoride, it is complex. Like I'm going to, if you compare it to something like vaccination, right, where the evidence is just a 100% slam dunk, right? There aren't that many areas in science where you can say that. So, vaccination saves millions of lives every year, mostly kids, right? It's just complete and utter slam dunk. In fluoride, the evidence is a little bit more complex. And you could argue in a liberal democracy that the benefit you're getting, dental care, maybe not as dramatic, right? So from a social health policy perspective, it's an interesting discussion. But you look at the body of evidence about fluoride, and it's pretty clear there's a strong benefit. And in fact, most public health organizations around the world listed as one of the greatest public health achievements, right? Where we have this strategy that we can use on a community level to make a difference. And of course, Mary, it benefits often the most disadvantaged communities, right? I think that's something else that's often forgotten in the debate. So I think that the evidence is pretty clear that it's beneficial. And that's not to say we shouldn't continue to study it and weigh the benefits versus the risks. But clearly, I think the science is pretty clear there.
Yeah, because I think too, in the book, didn't you mention that when fluoride was taken away from a community, there was a rise in cavities?
Yes, we have studies in fact right here in Calgary. I'm in Edmonton, go Edmonton, but in Calgary, my neighbor, they there's been studies that have shown that happened exactly as you described it. And there have been other communities where we've seen that happen. So that's sort of a natural experiment, right? Where we're able to see that play out. And they've done a lot of other studies. Now, the other reason it's complicated, Mary, is because there's fluoride in our water, like naturally, right? And it varies in different communities depending on the water sources, and that can make studying it difficult. And then you have these sort of scaremongering studies, which I'm sure you've heard about, the adverse impact that fluoride can have on things like IQ and things like that. And often they don't take into account exactly what I said, sort of the complexity of the existing relevant factors, the variables. So one of those topics, as I say in the book, you got to take a step back, right, and just look at that body of evidence and what does it actually say. And I use that phrase, body of evidence, a lot in the book.
Yeah.
So you could probably guess that I use it at the end.
Yeah, and I see why too, because and you make a good point in the book about, when one study comes out and it shows maybe a certain kind of effect, we have to be careful about that because one study doesn't usually make or break anything.
Really important point. And now more than ever, right? Think about how one study, and often it's a bad study, Mary, one study can change the narrative, right? And that happens so much throughout the pandemic. As it, for example, where you'll have one bad study about something like ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine, and all of a sudden it drives the public discourse. And even when better studies, good randomized controlled trials come out to give us a more definitive answer, that earlier narrative dominates, right? And that is a real challenge for science communication. And we see it all the time in nutrition, where there'll be an observational study that says X, Y, or Z, and then we get better studies down the road that don't really change that narrative. And there's been actually really interesting research that highlights that. There was a fascinating study, I talk about it in the book, that showed that actually poor observational studies get more press, get more coverage than the really powerful randomized control trials. And I think one of the reasons is those observational studies are often dramatic. They're about coffee or chocolate or wine and the result is dramatic, as opposed to the randomized controlled trial that maybe it's not such a dramatic finding and maybe it's a negative result, and so that just doesn't get the same press.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Another thing too, something I do that you bring up in the book, I weigh myself a couple of times a week, and that bathroom scale has become for some people, maybe many people, the most evil device that you could have in your house. Can you talk about that? And really, should we be weighing ourselves? I mean, if our goal, let's say, because for many people, right, at the start of the new year, okay, I'm going to lose weight. I want to lose 5 pounds or 10 pounds or whatever. How does the bathroom scale play into that?
Yeah, this is another controversial topic,
yeah.
right? It is. Because if you right now, you go Google scale, and I did this for the book, right? You're going to get a million posts that talk about throw the scale out. Your weight isn't related to your health, or your health isn't related to your weight, and be free, and don't judge yourself. And I totally get it. Weight bias is a real issue, and you know what? You can be healthy at any weight, like or healthier. Let's put it that way. Exercise, eating well, those are key. But there have been numerous really well done studies that I gotta be careful because some of them are observational, but they're large, and there's a body of evidence that suggests that using a scale does help people control their weight. And it is, as I've talked to many experts on this, an effective tool for weight loss. Now, we have to be really careful here because we're generally talking about adults. And if you are, a young adult or an adolescent that may have body image issues, it's not going to be a good strategy, right? But if you are an adult striving to maintain your weight or lose weight, using a scale can be an effective tool.
What I find interesting about that whole issue is what we ascribe to the scale. I mean, I started off and I said, oh, it can be considered the most evil device. Like, a scale's not evil. It's nothing, right? It's just a thing. And it seems to, it's what we impose on that scale. It's the way we look at that scale, right? It's just sitting there. We decide how we want to use it and whether we use it or not.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And one of the people I interviewed, talked about that and how it's really the social constructs that we absorb that we're projecting onto the scale that makes the scale evil, right? And if we just take a step back and say, hey, that's just an arbitrary number, and I'm just using this to, maintain my calorie intake, as a check on as opposed to, projecting your self-worth onto that number, which, all of pop culture tells us we're supposed to do, right? I do think, I've worked in the diet, the obesity space for a long time, for over a decade. And I do think this is one of those areas where there has been, we're not perfect, but incremental improvements, right? About body image and how we all come in different shapes and sizes and we can be healthier in those shapes and sizes. Like when I wrote The Cure for Everything, I think that was 2010, and we did research before that on this topic. I think the environment was more toxic, than, hey, it's still terrible. And social media, especially for the youth, has made it, so many problems out there, but at least we're seeing more different shapes and sizes represented, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah. So then how do you kind of negotiate the whole thing of, acceptance and body image and, as long as you are healthy with obesity and the negative repercussions that obesity can cause? Do you know what I mean? Like,
you can probably see me
sweating.
Yeah. It is a really complex topic.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you do this, Mary. I sometimes think about, what have I think this is a very good thing to do for your own intellectual humility. What have I changed my mind on? What topics has my views evolved on? And this is one of them. Earlier in my career, I would say I was more forceful, I'll put it that way, in how I viewed weight loss, and how and the strategies we need to deploy in order to fight obesity.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is it's incredibly difficult to lose weight long term. Obesity is just fantastically complex from so many factors are relevant to it,
Right.
from socioeconomics to genetics to your microbiome and on and on and on and on. And weight stigma is a real issue, right? And the paradoxical reality is, shaming people about their weight makes it more difficult to lose weight, right? So you're right, Mary. This is a really complex problem that is difficult to negotiate from a science communication perspective, because yes, obesity does matter to our health. Diabetes is a real, public health challenge that is having a global impact.
Yeah.
So that is really, I don't have an easy answer, but I do think we need to accept that losing weight is difficult, that we all come in different shapes and sizes, while at the same time recognizing that obesity is a real issue and that we've got to strive to develop strategies that can promote healthy lifestyles. How's that for a not satisfactory answer to a great question?
No, because I totally empathize with you. It is a tricky one, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, when it comes down to it, is really the most important thing your health or your acceptance in your image? I don't. Well, the two are connected, though. It's a tough one. It's messy. Yeah, it's connected. Yeah.
And the other thing is, you think about a lot of these strategies that we tell people to integrate into their lives, and like a really austere diet or something like that. Look, the best diet, what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
I'm going to say it anyway. The best diet
Nothing's
is
changed.
a diet that's healthy, that is sustainable, and it's one that you enjoy, because that's the only one that's what's going to work, right? Healthy, sustainable, and one that you enjoy. Because if you're doing some crazy diet, first of all, we have the studies that tell us it's not going to work. There is no magic diet. There is no magic diet.
No.
So you've got to pick a healthy one that's sustainable.
But I have to say, the whole low carb That does work, right?
There is
Cutting back on carb. No? Really?
There's no,
Come
it's
on.
funny because we go through these phases where there's like
Yeah.
these macro diet,
Yeah.
macronutrients.
But just even cutting back on carbs or trying to no, because I know so
magic.
many people who've lost weight on just cutting back on carbs.
No, they haven't, Mary. You look at the law. you know what happens? You know what happens is people pay attention to what they're eating for a period of time. Whether it's gluten-free, whether it's the paleo diet, or they pay attention to what they're eating for a period of time and they lose weight. And then they ascribe it to that diet, right? But there is, sure, the one thing is with carbs is it's often associated with, let's call it junk food. That's for brevity's sake, because that's a contested term too.
Yeah.
But it's often, eating lots of carbs is perhaps associated with empty calories. I'll put it that way, right? And so if you but there are a lot of healthy carbs out there, whole grains.
Totally. Yeah.
And so, if you were like, someone put a gun to my head and said, Tim, you got to pick one diet, the Mediterranean diet probably has the most evidence surrounding it.
Okay.
But Canadians, humans are incredibly resilient, and you can be healthy on a variety of diets. Look around the world, right? But it's whole grains, fruits and vegetables, healthy proteins, nuts and legumes.
What we already
there really
know.
is no magic.
Exactly. We know that. So just relax, everybody.
Relax, damn it.
Okay. So is underwear good or bad for our health?
That one again.
Don't tell me it's messy.
Whatever works
Don't
for you.
even tell me about body of evidence here.
I was trying to think of a way that I could say it that sort of summarizes everything. Whatever works for you. I'll put it that way. You want to go Commando? Go Commando. It's funny. No. So many people bring up that section of the book.
Because the thinking it's not so okay. It's not so much underwear. It's tight underwear. I think that's been the issue, right? Where people think,
especially with men, right?
Men.
But also with women, but especially with men. So the evidence is again way less definitive than people might think. And of course, this is one of those areas, and I try to sort of sneak. It's a Trojan horse section because I try to sneak in the idea that sometimes there's topics that we think have a lot of evidence behind them when in reality they don't. There aren't labs around the world running clinical trials on underwear, going Commando versus there have been some studies on this, as and I reference them in the book, but there actually isn't a whole bunch. And so I come down to sort of the soft conclusion that, if you're trying to have a baby and you are worried about it, couldn't hurt to go to boxers or not, right? And there's probably no huge benefit to going Commando. And I interview my friend Jen Gunter about women. I think she wrote the Vagina Bible.
Oh yeah, well-known doctor.
Yeah, and she has a better sense of it. Yeah, she said the same thing. They're really, wear what's comfortable for you and enjoy.
Yeah. Okay. That's another good one we can relax about. Now, I'm a coffee drinker. I don't know if you. Oh, yes, you are. You are too.
Poor Mary.
See, I know. And I feel bad about drinking so many cups a day because of the caffeine. And then when you said in the book about it actually hydrating me, I'm like, what? I never thought it would be hydrating me.
Yeah, so we can tackle two myths here, right? First is the 8 glasses of water a day myth, which I cannot believe will not die, right? It's been around. It won't die.
Yeah.
Forever.
Yeah.
and it won't die.
I don't drink. I can't actually. I cannot stomach 8 glasses of. Yeah, I just can't. I can't do it.
Well, you don't need it. You drink when you're thirsty. Thank you, evolution. I see all my students, they'll have like the water,
the big, huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like they're going to trek across the Sahara Desert, after my class, and any fluid you drink counts. And some of your listeners might be going, yeah, but coffee dehydrates. Yeah, but in the aggregate, in total, it still hydrates. You follow what I mean? So even if it is a little bit of a diuretic, it's still in total hydrates. Now, with respect to whether coffee is good or bad for you, I come back to it again and again in the book because I love coffee so much.
Yeah, me too. I know.
It's a really good example of, first of all, how hard it is to do good nutrition research and how science is often represented in the public sphere, which is really core to your work, right?
Yep.
It's it's difficult to get it right. I mean, it's hard to do good nutritional research. And I think that coffee is a great example because you see it go through these ebbs and flows. And it wasn't that long ago. You can probably remember this, where coffee was bad for you. Everyone was switching to tea, and it was coffee gave you adrenal fatigue, and it was cancer causing, and then it became like a superfood. Which we're almost still in that zone now. And I think the reality is, if you look at the totality of the evidence, the body of evidence again, it's not bad for you and perhaps good for you. I think that's the best, safest conclusion that you can come to.
Depends on how much you drink, right? I mean, if you're drinking 10 cups a day, that's a lot of caffeine.
So also you have to decide how it impacts your life. Like, you're having trouble sleeping at night, cut back. If it hurts, some people, it upsets their stomach, cut back. One of my brothers gets jittery from it. He just doesn't like that feeling. So you have to find out how it affects your life. But surprisingly, some of these studies, and we have to be careful not to overinterpret them because they're observational, but pretty large amounts of coffee. It's
I know, I was shocked.
It's pretty significant amount in some of these studies. So, of course, I joke in the book and other places often that massive, confirmation bias here for me, because if I had to pick like 3 substances I was allowed, the aliens came down and said, Tim, you can only have coffee's one of them. So
for sure.
Huge confirmation bias for me.
That's okay. That's okay, because the evidence supports you and me. So this is okay. Now, another thing that surprised me in your book was the section you had on ranting. Because I'd always assumed that, it's good to have occasionally, a hearty rant because you're letting out, your repressed anger and frustration, but that's not necessarily true.
It's not necessarily, this is one of my favorite sections.
Yeah.
I loved it. And they actually, editors, Penguin, I have an amazing editor, that she cut it down.
And you went on a rant.
And on with all these cultural examples. I had a whole thing on John Lennon that it ended up like 2 sentences in the book. And she was right, by the way. One of the rules in life, and again, this is the editor is always right.
Yeah, right. No, totally. Yeah, less is more. Less is more.
Less is more. But you're right. And this evidence tells us pretty consistently that there is no sort of psychological or emotional benefit to ranting, and there may be harms. And one of the things that I think is fascinating about this, one of the reasons I use this example is there's never been evidence to support it.
Really, even in psychology? Like
there's never been good empirical evidence to support this, right? And there has long been evidence that it's potentially harmful. Like it's gasoline on the fire, right? So you rant, it's not a release of pressure. You rant and it actually kind of fuels your rage, right? And how relevant is this in the social media age, right? Where it's just, social media is a rage machine.
Yeah.
Right? So,
right.
So that's, we heard it from Freud, and we had a lot of speculation about the value of ranting. But there's also been some interesting research that talks about when people rant, they often regret it after, right? So that again,
especially if it's written, because it's there forever.
Yeah. And I have a couple times in my life where I've regretted ranting, and never pushed the send button, right? So yeah, it is fascinating. But this idea of catharsis, and one of the reasons I love pop culture is it's taken as a truism in virtually every TV show. Every movie, you think about, you got to go you got to let it out and talk to your friend about it. And there's just no evidence to support that at all. And there really never has been. Now, that's not to say, there's really interesting research about talk therapy and the therapeutic and clinical benefit of, true psychological help from psychological and mental health experts. We're talking about ranting, right? Which is a different animal.
Right. I think I bet a lot of people would disagree with you, because they probably would, I'm guessing they might say, but when I, go on my rant, I immediately feel better afterwards. Right? That
You're
immediate
right.
feel. Yeah.
Studies have shown that. So studies back that up. But then they immediately don't feel better. I talk about some of this data in in the book. I had a piece in the Globe and Mail on this too. It's a little bit longer if you want if you want to learn more about it. But this is one of the reasons you do empirical research, right? Because often people they'll say this is how they feel, or but when you actually do the empirical research on the impact, you can see how it actually plays out. And there have been these kinds of therapies, scream therapy and all that kind of thing, where they actually found
you're supposed to go in the forest or something, aren't you? And you start yelling and all that kind of stuff.
And there's just no evidence to support it. And think about all those scenes and all those movies where people do exactly that, right? Or mad as hell, I can't take it anymore,
Oh yeah, Network. Of course. Yeah. Okay, now you got me thinking too. I mean, how much do you think of this? Because you mentioned, every movie, every TV show, there's always like the great rant, right? And it's usually, and it is about the self, isn't it? Because that's what a rant is. It's about the self. How much do you think culture plays into this? Do you think a lot of it is a Western, like sort of a North American thing where we idealize the rant? Whereas maybe in other cultures, not so much.
I think this is an excellent point. And, and we live in a rant culture now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's almost a good rant is almost viewed as a noble thing to do.
Yes.
Right. And
it's like the underdog, the little person, right? And then they have this rant and they've proven themselves.
If the former president of the United States is viewed a little bit differently, or the owner of Twitter. But it is. I think you're 100% correct, Mary. And it is. It's almost like this. I've been disrespected, or you've got to defend your position, and there. I interviewed an experimental psychologist in the book who said, look, think about if you put those energies in a more creative, positive area. If you use that same kind of rage and deployed it in a more positive way. Would the world be a better place? And, it's a rhetorical question. I think it's obvious what the answer is.
Yeah.
The world doesn't need more ranting. I think we can all agree on that. Okay.
Another thing that, I think is probably going to change with me after reading your book is when you talk about busyness. I basically have two states that I tell people. I'm either busy or I'm really busy. I'm guilty. And you've caught so many of us on that. Because really, are we that busy? Are we?
This is me too. At the beginning, I say I walk the walk, about putting my phone away. This is one of the ones where I do not, I don't take my own advice. I bet I tell someone how busy I am at least once a day.
Oh yeah, for sure. Me too.
And there's this whole busy brag culture, right?
I love that term, busy brag. Yeah.
Now I've got 4 young adult kids, and I think it's starting to change a little bit in a healthy way. But if you actually do the empirical, and they've done these really, and again, this is an area that's hard to study well. And I note that caveat in the book. It is very hard to study it well because there's a lot of, remembering what you were doing and stuff. But there has been a lot of interesting research from good groups around the world, good research groups around the world that show that, we're not as busy as we think we are. There's some, and I'm not talking about everyone, and I want to be really careful out there because people are like, I'm really busy. but as a society, we're amongst the least busy of all time. I know that's hard to believe.
Wait a minute. Is there a difference? Hold it. Is there a difference between being busy and preoccupied?
Yes, that's
okay.
Right. And a very good point, right? Because, we all think we're busy because we're always doing stuff.
Right.
Think about what I said earlier. I said, I look at the news and I get absorbed at news that's relevant to my work, and maybe I should be doing it, but do I really need to be doing it? But that eats up an hour of my day. And there's been studies that show how much constructive work people actually do at jobs where they say they're busy, and it's like unbelievable. Like 3 hours out of the day you're actually working, kind of thing. And there have been studies that have shown that we have more free time now than almost ever before. Part of the problem is we're carrying our office around with us in our pocket, so it feels like you're busy, right? Because you can be working all the time, right? And that kind of ongoing pressure, I think, fuels this sense of how busy feeling busy means we are busy. Now, it's really important there. I have some caveats in there. There are certain professions that, yes, they are busier, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but sort of globally. And it's the same with parenting. Parents feel so guilty about not being around their kids. I have this section on parenting. And that was one of the ones I found fascinating. And our world spends more time with their kids than probably, any time in the last 150 years.
Yeah.
Right.
I could see that. Yeah. No, it would be an interesting experiment. I just thought about this. If I actually tracked my day and how much time is truly devoted to work, like to what, and then how much time is distraction and other things. And I'm just goofing around on the internet it would be interesting to know. And I bet you're right. I bet I'd be shocked by the results.
Well, there's been those interesting studies that have come out since the book about people that, with those 4-day work weeks, where the amount of work that's actually done doesn't decrease. I have to be careful because I haven't looked carefully into those studies, but there's been a lot of studies that looked at this from different directions, right? And now that's not to say that, there are incredibly chaotic information environment it matters, right? Feeling busy matters too. And I make that point in there, right? But the good news is maybe some of that's controllable. You know what I mean, Mary? Like, that's something that's within our control.
When I closed your book after having read it, one thing I thought of though is, who's your audience for this book? Or maybe who's your intended audience? Because I don't know whether they're necessarily the ones who are reading it, right? So for me, because you're either correcting or you're telling people, hey, this is evidence that you may not know about. I'm guessing the people who pick up your book, they're kind of they're converted anyway because they want to know. Their mind is open to the information that you're going to give them, right? The people who you really want to reach, are they ever going to pick up your book?
Another great question, and it is the enduring science communication challenge. Are we speaking to the converted, right? Or are we having a broader reach? And one of the reasons I wrote the book as I did is I wanted to make it relatable, and I didn't want to make it sound like I wanted it to be clear that I totally get it. I totally get why people are pulled into these information vortexes. It happens to all of us. And as you know, throughout the book, I talk about situations where it happens to me.
Yeah.
It happens with big decisions and little decisions. And so I hope that these kinds of science communication strategies can make a difference. The sad thing is it's getting more difficult, I think, Mary, because a lot of these topics are becoming more polarized. And the more polarized it becomes, more it becomes about ideology, and it can be more difficult to reach those audiences. But we got to keep trying.
I know. You see, because to me, that's really the most important question, right? I mean, beyond your book, how do you reach people with science? I mean, do you think there will always be people that won't believe? Right? It doesn't matter what or how convincing an argument you make. There will always be a certain segment of society that won't believe. But do you believe there is that segment that, I don't know, maybe they're just on the ledge? Maybe they can look at science and go, oh yeah, okay, that's the body of evidence. Yeah, okay, that's reasonable. That sounds reasonable to me. I mean, how do you view it?
I think that's a terrific way of putting it, and I'm an optimist. So I think that, and I think the evidence backs this up. There's going to be a cohort of individuals that, around, depending on what survey, what study you look at, anywhere between, and you've probably seen this work yourself, about 5 to 9% they're hardcore. Right. And it's going to be very difficult to change their mind. But the problem is, especially in our current information environment, they're having an impact on that movable middle, that last group, that population that you talked about. But the good news is, I think we can make a difference. There's a growing body of evidence on science communication about how we can make a difference, how we can counter misinformation. Yes, it's getting more difficult because of social media and other platforms. But the body of evidence tells us that debunking, good science communication, pre-bunking, teaching critical thinking, all of those things really can make a difference. And the other little bit of good news is that I think more people are taking this seriously. Even since I wrote this book, this is this world I live in, the world that I do research in. And everybody takes this seriously now. No one thinks that misinformation is not a serious issue. I mean, there was a study that came out in August, 19 country big survey, and virtually everyone thinks it's a bit. I think it's only 5% of people in those countries surveyed think it's not an issue. They put it right up there with climate change, the spread of misinformation. So that's good news, because that's going to mobilize policymakers, researchers, clinicians, science communicators all over the world.
This was a great discussion, Tim. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary. I loved it.
Yeah. And I hope it kind of sets people off and inspires them to do their own little thing for 2023.
Thanks very much, Mary.
That's Timothy Caulfield. He's the author of a number of books, including Relax, a guide to everyday health decisions with more facts and less worry. He's also the Canada Research Chair in Health Law and Policy, a professor in the Faculty of Law and the School of Public Health at the University of Alberta. Now, for more information on Tim and his work, and he's working on a new book, by the way, so keep an eye out for that, please check out our show notes. That's it for this edition of the Cram Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. And our thanks to the Temerty Foundation for their generous support. Thanks very much for joining us. See you next time.